The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the quiet city street. Emily walked briskly, her shoulders slumped, her thoughts heavy with worry. She had just lost her job, the third one in 6 months, and the weight of her failure seemed to press on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her mind raced with the harsh words of her boss, the disappointment of her parents, and the constant feeling of falling behind in life. She felt like a failure, like she wasn't enough. As she passed a small alley, something caught her eye, a rustling sound. She paused, glancing down. There, huddled against the wall, was a scruffy dog, its ribs visible through its matted fur. Its eyes, wide and full of fear, locked onto hers. The dog looked hungry, and Emily's heart tightened at the sight. It had been abandoned, just like she felt. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had no money left to buy food for herself, let alone a dog, but something deep inside her stirred. Without thinking, she pulled out the last of her sandwich from her bag and crouched down. "Here, little one," she whispered, holding out the food. "I'm not sure if this will be enough, but you need it more than I do." The dog slowly approached, sniffing the air, then gently took the sandwich from her hand, its tail wagging slightly. Emily smiled, her heart softening as she watched the hungry animal eat. In that moment, for the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't alone. But what happened next would change everything. As the dog slowly finished the last bite of the sandwich, Emily couldn't help but watch, her heart aching for the small creature. The dog's fur was dirty and tangled, and its body trembled slightly, not just from the cold evening air, but from something deeper. It looked so fragile, as if it had been through so much already. Emily's fingers curled into her palms, feeling a surge of emotion she hadn't expected. She felt a deep sense of connection with the dog, like she was seeing a reflection of herself in its sad, lonely eyes. The dog finished eating, licking the crumbs from its lips, then sat back down, watching Emily cautiously. It didn't bark, didn't move away. Instead, it stayed close, almost as if it was waiting for her to make the next move. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with an unspoken understanding. Emily bit her lip, glancing around the empty street. It was late, and no one else was in sight. There were no other people who seemed to notice the stray dog, no one who cared. She could feel her heart race as she thought about what to do. Her initial instinct was to leave. It would be easy. She had nothing left to offer. She had her own struggles, her own worries. But the look in the dog's eyes, the way it seemed to trust her despite everything it had been through, made it impossible to just walk away. She stood there for a moment, unsure, as the wind began to pick up. The dog's fur ruffled slightly, and it let out a soft whine, as if asking for something more. Emily's mind raced, torn between her own fears, the growing sense of responsibility tugging at her heart. She wanted to help, but what could she possibly do? Then, without fully understanding why, Emily kneeled down slowly, reaching her hand toward the dog. The animal didn't flinch, didn't back away. Instead, it tilted its head, eyes wide, studying her. The softest flicker of hope passed through its gaze. She could almost hear the silent plea in its eyes. "Please don't. Leave me." Emily's throat tightened and the warmth in her chest grew. The dog needed someone. And, for some strange reason, it felt like Emily needed the dog just as much. She bit back the tears threatening to fall and took a deep breath. "It's okay," she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "I won't leave you." She stood up and looked around, searching for a solution. It was getting dark, and she had no idea where to go next. But she knew one thing. She couldn't leave the dog alone, not like this. Emily took a tentative step forward, and the dog stood up, following her closely. The street felt quieter, now the weight of the moment heavy in the cool night air. She had no idea what she was doing, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something important. The bond that had begun in That simple act of feeding the dog was already starting to grow, and she couldn't walk away from it. "I'll figure this out," Emily whispered to herself. "We'll figure this out." And with that, she took forward, the little dog by her side. The next few days were harder than Emily had imagined. She had taken the dog back to her small apartment, setting up a corner with blankets and a bowl of water, but it wasn't as easy as she had hoped. The dog, now that it was safe, wouldn't eat. It curled up in the corner, trembling slightly, its eyes wide with fear whenever Emily tried to approach. No matter how gently she called to it, the dog backed away, as if it feared she would hurt it. Emily spent hours sitting nearby, trying to coax the animal into trusting her. She spoke softly, tried to offer it treats, and even lay down on the floor so the dog could come to her when it felt ready. But the fear in the dog's eyes never seemed to go away, and Emily began to wonder if she had made a mistake. What if the dog had been too damaged to heal? What if it never learned to trust her? Her self-doubt grew. She had no experience with animals. She didn't know how to help them recover from their pain. She barely had enough money to take care of herself, let alone a dog who needed special care. Her apartment was small, and it wasn't exactly pet-friendly. Her friends had already expressed concern, and her parents, well, they didn't understand why she would bring home a stray when she was already struggling so much herself. They had enough of their own problems to worry about. "Emily, are you sure about this?" her mother had asked on the phone the day she brought the dog home. "You barely have enough for yourself. You should think about what you need before taking on something like this." But Emily hadn't been able to shake the feeling that the dog needed her, and somehow she needed the dog too. Still, there were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made the right choice. The pressure to be responsible, to somehow make this work, weighed on her every day. On the third morning, Emily woke up early, the soft sound of the dog's breathing filling the room. She had been awake for hours, unable to sleep with the worry and uncertainty gnawing. She glanced over at the corner where the dog was still curled up, its body still tense. She knew she had to try again, but the fear of failing, of not being enough for this animal that trusted her so completely, felt too much to bear. Just as she was about to get up to make some coffee, she heard a soft sound, a faint whine, followed by a soft rustle. She froze, watching as the dog slowly stood up and approached the bowl of food she had left out the night before. The dog sniffed the air, hesitated, then began eating slowly, almost cautiously. Emily's heart swelled with relief. She moved slowly, careful not to startle it. The dog didn't flinch this time when she took a step toward it. Instead, it looked up at her, and for the first time since she brought it home, the dog made eye contact. There was something in its eyes, something soft and trusting, that made Emily's throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The dog's tail wagged just a little, a small, tentative movement that spoke volumes. Emily couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to her. Over the next week, things started to improve. The dog still wasn't fully relaxed, but it started to eat more, and it would sometimes lay down beside Emily as she worked on her laptop. It never got too close, but it was progress. Emily began to see glimpses of the dog's true personality, curious, affectionate, and slowly but surely trusting. One afternoon, as Emily was sitting on the couch trying to write an email for a new job application, the dog came up to her and placed its head on her lap. Emily's breath caught in her throat, and she looked down at the dog, surprised. It was the first time the dog had come to her for comfort. It wasn't afraid of her anymore. Not completely. Slowly, she reached down and began to stroke its fur, her fingers trembling slightly. The dog didn't move away. It let her touch it, its eyes closing in contentment. A soft sigh escaped Emily's lips as she let herself relax into the moment. It felt like everything, the struggles, the doubts, the pain had led to this. A small, quiet bond that spoke of healing, of trust being slowly built. That evening, when Emily went to bed, the dog curled up beside her on the floor. It wasn't in the corner anymore, hiding away. It had found its place next to her, and for the first time, Emily didn't feel so alone. The days were still hard. There were still moments when Emily wasn't sure if she could keep up with the responsibilities, the challenges, the doubts. But now, every time she looked at the dog, the way it had begun to trust her, the way it seemed to understand that she was there to stay, she felt a little stronger. And when the dog would nuzzle her hand or wag its tail in the smallest gesture of affection, Emily knew that, despite everything, they were both healing together. One afternoon, as Emily was cleaning the corner of the room where the dog had been staying, she noticed something strange. The dog had been lying on its side, resting, its eyes closed, as she picked up a small pile of old newspapers. A glint of metal caught her eye. She bent down and carefully pulled it from underneath the papers. It was a small, worn tag, the kind that dogs wear on their collars. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't noticed a collar when she first found the dog, and she had never thought to check. The tag was scratched and faded, but she could still make out a name. It read, Max. Emily sat down slowly, holding the tag in her hands. She looked at the dog, who was now awake and watching her, its eyes alert but calm. The dog Max was staring at the tag in her hand, and for a moment, Emily could have sworn there was a flicker of recognition in its eyes. She felt a pang of sadness. What had happened to this dog? Why had it been abandoned? She gently took Max's paw in her hand, tracing the rough pads of his foot. As she did, she noticed something else. A scar, a faint but obvious mark running along his leg. It looked old, like it had healed long ago, but the sight of it made her stomach tighten. Had Max been hurt before? Had he been through something terrible? Emily felt her heart break for him. She didn't know what had happened to him, but she knew it wasn't good. Max had been through so much more than anyone should ever have to face. She looked at the scar again, then at the dog, and a wave of understanding washed over her. Max wasn't just a stray dog. He had a past, one that was full of pain and loss. Max stood up and slowly walked over to the window, sitting by it and looking outside. Emily watched him closely, wondering what he was thinking. Then something unexpected happened. The dog's ears perked up, and he began to wag his tail. His eyes locked onto something in the distance, and he let out a soft whine. Max, Emily whispered softly. She stood up and walked over to him, her curiosity growing. Max didn't move, but he kept staring out the window, his body tense. Emily followed his gaze and saw an old familiar park across the street. She had passed it many times before, but today something felt different. Max's reaction to the park was strange. It was like he remembered something. She had a sudden thought. What if Max had lived here before? What if this park was important to him? Could this be the place where he had been abandoned? Or had he once had a family that brought him there? The questions filled Emily's mind, and she suddenly felt a deep need to find out. "Come on, Max," she said softly, her voice filled with gentle encouragement. She opened the door, and the dog immediately stood up, his tail wagging slightly. There was something about the way he moved, the way he seemed to recognize the park, that made Emily's heart skip. She grabbed his leash and clipped it onto his collar. Together they walked toward the park. Max's steps were steady, and as they got closer, Emily noticed that he seemed more alert, more alive. He was pulling slightly, eager to get there. It was as though he was being pulled by a memory, by a place that meant something to him. When they reached the park, Max stopped in his tracks. His eyes darted around, searching. Emily's heart pounded as she watched him. What was he looking for? What had happened here? Max walked toward a particular tree at the edge of the park, stopping to sniff the ground beneath it. Emily followed him, standing a few feet away. She watched as he lingered for a moment before sitting down, looking up at her. His tail wagged slowly. It hit Emily then. Max had been searching for something, some sign of what he had lost. It was clear now. The dog had a history, one that was tied to this place. And in that moment, Emily realized that rescuing Max hadn't just been about saving him, it had been about understanding him and helping him heal from the past. In helping him, she had found something she didn't expect, a deeper sense of healing for herself. She had found the courage to face her own fears and uncertainties, just as Max was facing his. She kneeled down beside him, placing a hand on his back. "I'm here, Max," she whispered softly, "and I won't leave you. Not now, not ever." As Emily and Max sat quietly under the tree in the park, a strange sense of peace settled over them. The air was cool, and Max lay down beside her, his head resting on her lap. For the first time, it felt like they were connected to souls healing together. Emily smiled gently, stroking his fur as the wind whispered through the branches above. But just as she was starting to relax, the peace was shattered by a sudden noise loud, fast footsteps approaching from behind. Emily turned around to see a group of children running toward the park, laughing and shouting. Without warning, one of the children, a boy with a soccer ball, came too close to Max, kicking the ball right toward him. Max's body tensed immediately. His eyes went wide with fear. And before Emily could stop him, he bolted away, running as fast as he could. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she stood up in panic. "Max! Max! Wait!" she called out, but he didn't stop. The children were laughing, unaware of the dog's distress. Emily pushed past them, calling Max's name desperately. The dog was already running toward the street, not looking where he was going. "No, Max! Come back!" she cried, her voice breaking. Her legs moved faster than she thought possible, but Max was too quick. The sound of rushing cars filled to her ears as she saw him darting toward the busy road. Her heart raced. She couldn't let him reach the street. "Max, stop!" she shouted, her voice full of fear. She reached out, but Max, driven by the panic in his heart, didn't listen. Just as he reached the curb, a car came speeding around the corner, too fast to stop in time. Emily's body went cold. She watched in horror, frozen, as the car came closer and closer to Max. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Her mind screamed at her to act, to do something, anything. In that moment, she couldn't think of anything else but Max, the dog who had come to mean everything to her. She had to save him. With no time to think, she made a decision. Emily ran forward, her body moving on pure instinct, desperate to reach Max before it was too late. She threw herself forward, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him back just in time. The car swerved, narrowly missing them both. The screeching of tires echoed in Emily's ears, and her breath came in sharp gasps. She had done it. She had saved him. But the relief didn't come right away. Max was trembling in her arms, his whole body shaking with fear. Emily held him tightly, her own hands shaking as she whispered his name. "Max, it's okay. You're safe. I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." For a few moments, they just sat there, breathing in the cool air. Max slowly calmed down, the frantic tremors fading as he realized he was no longer in danger. Emily stroked his fur, her heart still racing, but her love for him growing stronger than ever. "I'm not going to let you go, Max," she whispered, holding him close. "Not ever." In that moment, Emily knew that they had crossed a line. They were no longer just two strangers. She was his person now, and he was hers. And no matter what came next, they would face it together. The bond between them was unbreakable. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming realization that their connection had become something truly special. She would never let anything separate them. She would protect him with everything she had, because Max had shown her that sometimes saving someone else is also about saving yourself. And for the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel so alone. As the days passed, Max slowly began to trust Emily more and more. The dog who had once been so fearful now followed her everywhere, his steps light and his eyes bright with a newfound joy. Emily could see the change in him. His posture was no longer tense, his tail no longer tucked in fear. He was learning to be a dog again, free from the pain of his past. For Emily, the transformation was just as powerful. She had come to realize that in saving Max, she had saved herself too. The fear and loneliness she had carried for so long slowly melted away, replaced by something warmer, something stronger. She had learned the true meaning of unconditional love, the kind that accepts without question, that heals without asking why. It was a love that didn't need words, only presence. One evening, as Emily and Max sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Max, with his eyes closed and his body relaxed against her leg, seemed to be enjoying the moment just as much as she was. The bond they had formed was undeniable, silent, but deep, and full of meaning. "Look how far we've come, Max," Emily whispered, her voice barely more than a soft breath. "I never thought we'd get here, but here we are." Max tilted his head, as if understanding, and nudged her hand gently with his nose. She smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. In that moment, Emily knew that their journey together had only just begun. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to face, but whatever happened, she had a purpose now to give Max the life he deserved, a life full of love, safety, and kindness. And in return, he had given her something even more precious, a sense of belonging, of being needed, of having a reason to keep going. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stood up, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She looked at Max one last time, and with a smile she said, "We're in this together, always." With that simple promise, she knew their lives had changed forever. Love, kindness, and second chances were powerful things that had the power to heal and transform. And in that quiet moment, under the fading light of the day, Emily understood that every act of Levino, matter how small, could change a life forever, just like Max's life had changed hers.